The phone rang at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday night. I was already in bed, reading a paperback mystery novel that I had picked up from the library earlier that week. My reading glasses were sliding down my nose, and I had a cup of chamomile tea cooling on the nightstand beside me. The phone was one of those old landlines that I refused to give up, connected to a device that could receive calls at any hour, regardless of whether I wanted to answer them. I almost didn't pick up. But something made me reach for it. Some instinct that still operated on the frequencies I had learned to trust over decades of a life that had taught me to be alert, to pay attention, to understand that calls at midnight rarely carried good news. "Hello?" I said, my voice still rough with the approaching sleep that had begun to settle over my mind. "Grandma." The voice on the other end was small, terrified, barely recognizable. "Grandma, I'm sorry to call so late. I didn't know who else to call." I sat up immediately, my fatigue evaporating in an instant. "Sophia? Sweetheart, what's wrong?" My granddaughter was 17 years old, a junior at Westbrook Academy, one of the most prestigious private schools in the city. She was a girl who had been raised with every advantage: private tutors, expensive clothes, trips abroad. She had been born into a world of privilege that I could barely comprehend, despite being her grandmother. And I had not heard her voice sound like this before. Frightened. Fragile. Broken. "Grandma, I think my mother is trying to poison me." The words hung in the air between us like smoke. "Sophia, slow down. Tell me what happened. I can't talk here. She's asleep, but I don't want to risk it. She has to be sleeping. Can you come get me? I'll be at the corner of 8th and Market. I can leave through my bedroom window. Please, Grandma, I'm scared." "I'm on my way," I said, already standing, already moving toward my closet to find clothes. "Stay on the line with me. Don't hang up. I want to hear your voice the entire time until I'm there. My name is Margaret Chen. I am 68 years old. I am retired from working as a toxicologist for the State Forensic Laboratory, a position I held for 32 years. That means I spent 3 decades analyzing poisons, studying toxins, understanding the ways that substances could enter a body and cause damage from the inside out. It also means I knew the exact specific way that my granddaughter's words should not be possible. Not in this context. Not in my family. But her voice told me something different. I drove through the nighttime streets of the city at a speed that was probably too fast, ignoring red lights that were empty of other traffic. My hands were steady on the wheel, but my mind was spinning through possibilities, through scenarios, through the terrible logic of what poisoning meant. Sophia was waiting at the corner, wearing a hoodie pulled over her head and a backpack slung across her shoulders. She looked like she was trying to disappear into herself. The moment she saw my car, she ran to it and pulled open the passenger door, throwing herself into the seat with a desperation that broke my heart. "Drive," she said. "Just drive. Anywhere. Anywhere but home." I drove to an all-night diner about 20 minutes away from where we lived. A place that catered to truck drivers and insomniacs and people who had nowhere else to be at 1 a.m. We sat in a booth in the back, away from the few other people scattered throughout the restaurant. I ordered coffee for myself. I ordered hot chocolate and pie for Sophia, who didn't argue about it, which told me how frightened she actually was. "Tell me everything," I said, reaching across the table to take her hand. "From the beginning. Don't leave anything out." Sophia's hands were trembling. She wrapped them around the hot chocolate mug, seeking the warmth. "It started about 3 months ago," she said slowly. "I was sick. Really sick. I had this constant nausea, and I was losing weight, and my head ached all the time. I went to the doctor and they ran tests but couldn't figure out anything. They said maybe it was anxiety, maybe I was stressed about school, and they suggested I see a therapist. Did your mother take you to the therapist? No. That's the thing. When I told her the doctor thought it might be anxiety, she said a therapist was a waste of time. She said I was being dramatic. She said if I was really sick, the doctor would have found something. She seemed almost annoyed that I was sick. I felt something shift in my understanding of the situation. Sophia, what happened that made you suddenly think about poison? I overheard a conversation, she said. About 2 weeks ago. I was supposed to be asleep, but I couldn't sleep because my stomach hurt. I went downstairs to get some water, and I heard my mother on the phone in her room. Her door was open. She was talking to someone about how she needed something that would work fast, but not so fast that it would cause an immediate problem. She said she had a perfect way to administer it. Through supplements. She said I took them every morning without question. I felt the room tilt slightly. Did she say what you would happen? No. I heard my Uncle James on the other end asking her if it would show up in an autopsy, and she laughed. She actually laughed, Grandma. She said something about how our family doctor was a close personal friend and would never suspect anything because the symptoms matched my anxiety diagnosis so perfectly. Sophia, I need to ask you something very difficult. Do you remember anything else she said? Any names? Any specific substances? She mentioned Digitalis. I didn't know what that was at the time, so I looked it up later. It's a plant. It can cause heart attacks. She specifically said that it would look like a natural cause if I took too much. I sat back in the booth, processing this information with the analytical part of my brain that had been trained to understand poisons. Digitalis. Foxglove. A substance that in small doses could cause the exact symptoms Sophia had described. Nausea, weight loss, headaches, and eventually, if the dose was increased, a fatal cardiac event. Why didn't you tell me immediately? Because I was terrified that I was misunderstanding. What if I was wrong? What if I was truly just anxious and imagining that my mother was poisoning me? How do you accuse someone of that without proof? And I was scared that if I said something to you, you would confront her, and then she would know I knew, and things would get worse. But something changed. You called me tonight. Why? Sophia's eyes filled with tears. Because this morning she gave me a new supplement bottle. She said it was something special to help with my symptoms. She watched me take it. She literally stood in my room and waited until I swallowed it. And I realized that if I didn't do something, if I didn't reach out to someone, I was going to die. I was going to die and everyone would think it was from anxiety. I reached across the table and pulled my granddaughter into my arms. I held her while she cried. And I made a decision that would change the course of my retirement, the course of my family, and the course of justice in a way I could not yet foresee. I had been retired for 4 years. I had left the forensic laboratory because I was exhausted by the work, exhausted by the knowledge of the terrible things that people did to each other, exhausted by nights spent analyzing poisons that had been used to harm the innocent. I had thought my days of this kind of work were behind me. I was wrong. I drove Sophia to a 24-hour emergency room. I didn't call her mother. I didn't ask for permission. I simply took my granddaughter to the hospital and told the emergency room doctor that I suspected poisoning. I'm going to need blood work, a comprehensive toxicology panel, I told the doctor, a woman named Rachel Kim who was in her early 40s and had a no-nonsense demeanor that I appreciated. I suspect Digitalis glycosides. Small amounts administered over time. Dr. Kim looked at Sophia, then back at me. You're sure about this? I worked in forensic toxicology for 32 years, I said. I'm as sure as I can be without a full analysis. The tests took 4 hours. During those 4 hours, I sat with Sophia while they placed an IV and drew blood. I held her hand while she talked about her mother, about the relationship that had always felt slightly wrong but that she had never known how to articulate. She wasn't like other people's mothers, Sophia said. She was always calculating. Always looking at me like I was a problem to be solved or an asset to be managed. When I won my debate tournament last year, she didn't congratulate me. She asked me how winning would help me get into Harvard. When I told her I was interested in art, she said art was for people who couldn't do anything else with their lives. How long has she been like this? Since I was a kid, I think. But it got worse after my dad left. That was, let me think, 4 years ago? He and Mom had this huge fight and he just left. He didn't even say goodbye. After that, Mom became more intense. More controlling. More like she was obsessed with something. The results came back at 5:33 a.m. Dr. Kim came to the room with a folder in her hand and an expression of grim confirmation. Your granddaughter has Digitalis glycosides in her bloodstream, Dr. Kim said, sitting down in the chair across from us. High levels. Consistent with ongoing exposure. If she had taken that supplement her mother gave her this morning before coming to the hospital, the levels would have likely been fatal. We need to involve the police. I had not cried since my husband died 10 years ago. But I felt the tears start then, burning at the back of my eyes. Are you going to be okay? Dr. Kim asked Sophia gently. With medical supervision and careful monitoring, the Digitalis should leave her system within a week or 2. But we need to keep her here for observation, and we need to make sure she's not re-exposed. The police arrived 45 minutes later. A detective named Marcus Sullivan, a man in his early 50s with gray at his temples and a careful way of asking questions. I need you to understand that this is a very serious accusation, he said to me. Poisoning is a felony. If we move forward with an investigation and it turns out that the evidence doesn't support the claim, there will be serious consequences for making false accusations. I understand, I said. But I also understand toxicology. My granddaughter has Digitalis in her bloodstream. That plant doesn't appear in her system naturally. It was introduced intentionally. We'll need to search her house, secure the supplements bottle, speak with her mother. My mother doesn't know I'm here, Sophia interjected. She probably thinks I'm still asleep. We're going to need to inform her, Sullivan said. She has a right to know that her daughter has been hospitalized. What happened over the next several hours was something I had never experienced from this side of. I had worked with police investigations for decades, but I had always been the expert witness, the person called in to analyze evidence. Now I was a family member, watching as my granddaughter's mother was accused of attempting to murder her child. They took the supplement bottle from the house. They found Sophia's mother, Diane, my daughter-in-law, at home, confused and angry and demanding to know why the police were at her house with a warrant. This is ridiculous, she said when she learned that Sophia had accused her of poisoning. Margaret, you know what your granddaughter is like. She's dramatic. She's always been difficult. She probably read something on the internet and decided to blame me for her problems. But the toxicology tests proved otherwise. The supplement bottle contained 47 micrograms of Digitalis glycosides per serving. A normal serving of any supplement would contain 0. The recommended daily limit of Digitalis for medical purposes is 1 to 3 micrograms. Diane had been giving Sophia supplements containing more than 15 times the therapeutic dose of a deadly substance. My son, Robert, was Diane's ex-husband. They had been divorced for 4 years, and Robert had moved to California to start a new life. He had essentially abandoned his daughter to Diane's sole custody. The moment I called him with the news, he tried to deny what I was telling him. "That's not possible," he said. "Diane is difficult, but she wouldn't poison Sophia. Why would she do that?" "I don't know why, Robert. But the toxicology doesn't lie. Our daughter's blood contains enough Digitalis to cause a fatal cardiac event. The supplements her mother has been giving her are laced with it. There has to be another explanation. I've spent 32 years studying poisons. There is no other explanation. Your ex-wife has been slowly poisoning your daughter." Robert didn't know what to say to that. He just kept repeating that it wasn't possible, that it didn't make sense, that he couldn't believe Diane would do something like that. "Do you love your daughter?" I asked him, cutting through his denials. "Of course I do." "Then you need to get on a plane and come here. You need to stand beside her while she goes through this investigation. Because right now, the person who should love her most in this world just tried to kill her, and she needs her father." He showed up 3 days later. What unfolded over the next 2 weeks was an investigation that became increasingly darker as they dug deeper into Diane's background. Detective Sullivan brought in a behavioral analyst and a forensic psychiatrist. They compiled a timeline of Diane's behavior. They started interviewing people who knew her. What they found was a woman who had attempted to slowly poison her daughter for reasons that had nothing to do with hate and everything to do with profit. Diane's ex-husband, Robert, had been the beneficiary of a substantial trust fund left by his parents. Upon Robert's death, or in the event that Robert had no living relatives, the trust would revert to a charity designated by the original trustees. However, there was a clause in the trust. If Robert had a child at the time of his death, the child would inherit the trust. The value of the trust was approximately $3.2 million. Diane had discovered this clause during the divorce proceedings, and she had begun to formulate a plan. She would poison Sophia slowly enough that it would appear to be a natural cause, a cardiac event in a young woman with a history of anxiety. Once Sophia died, the investigation would lead to questions about whether she had any living relatives, and those relatives would inherit the trust. But Diane had miscalculated in multiple ways. She didn't know that I had spent my entire career studying poisons. She didn't know that Sophia would overhear the phone conversation. She didn't know that Sophia would have the courage to run to the hospital. What she didn't realize was that her actions had triggered an investigation that would expose not just one crime, but a pattern. Sullivan started looking into Diane's past. And what he found was shocking. Diane had been married 3 times before Robert. The first marriage ended when her husband died of a sudden cardiac event. He was 42 years old, in good health, and had left everything to Diane. She inherited over $1 million. The second marriage lasted 2 years. Her husband developed acute kidney failure and died. No specific cause was found. She inherited a $400,000 life insurance policy. The third marriage lasted 18 months. The husband experienced severe gastrointestinal distress, hospitalization, and recovery. He had become suspicious of Diane and hired a private investigator. The investigator discovered she had been adding antifreeze to his food in small amounts, which caused the kidney failure. He left her, but before he could file charges, he died in a car accident. The case was ruled an accident. But now, with the knowledge that Diane was poisoning her daughter, Sullivan went back and reviewed everything. He got toxicology samples from the previous 2 husbands reanalyzed using modern techniques. Both showed evidence of Digitalis in their systems. Diane was arrested on charges of attempted murder regarding Sophia. The police also reopened the investigations into the deaths of her previous husbands, though charging her with their murders proved more complicated without direct evidence from the time of death. But the case against her was undeniable. We had 1. Sophia's testimony about the overheard phone conversation. 2. Toxicology results showing Digitalis in Sophia's blood. 3. Analysis of the supplement bottle showing lethal doses of Digitalis. 4. Digitalis residue found in Diane's apartment and on her clothing. 5. A documented pattern of marriages to men with wealth followed by their deaths or medical crises. 6. The financial motive for Sophia's death. Diane's lawyer tried to argue that there was an alternative explanation. Perhaps someone else had poisoned the supplements. Perhaps Sophia was lying. Perhaps the toxicology results were inaccurate. But I testified. I explained, in clear terms that a jury could understand, what Digitalis is, how it works, why the evidence was conclusive. And by the time I finished my testimony, there wasn't a person in that courtroom who doubted what had happened. Diane was convicted of attempted murder and sentenced to 25 years in prison. The cases involving her previous husbands were reopened for investigation, but due to the passage of time and the degradation of evidence, there wasn't enough for formal charges. But the truth was known. Sophia moved in with me after the trial. She had nowhere else to go. Robert, my son, returned to California but promised to be more present in her life. He set up a trust fund for her education and future. Over the next 6 months, Sophia gradually healed. The toxins left her body. Her symptoms diminished. She began to look like a healthy 17-year-old girl instead of a sick, frightened child. She also began asking questions about her mother. About the motivations. About the other women that Diane had harmed. Why would someone do something like this? Sophia asked me one evening. We were sitting in my kitchen, and I was making tea. There are many reasons why people harm others, I said carefully. Money is one. Power is another. Some people are driven by circumstances. Some people are born with something inside them that makes them incapable of feeling empathy for others. Your mother appears to be someone who sees people as either tools to be used or obstacles to be removed. Do you think she's evil? I think she's deeply disturbed. Evil is a word that's easier to use than accurate. What she is someone who valued money and comfort more than the life and well-being of her own children. That's a particular kind of damage that leads to particular kinds of actions. Will she ever get out of prison? Likely not. With good behavior, she might be eligible for parole in 20 years. But she will be nearly 70 by then, and given the nature of her crimes, parole is unlikely to be granted. Sophia nodded, absorbing this information. I could see her processing it, understanding that the woman who had tried to kill her was now permanently removed from her life. The one thing I never expected was to be contacted by a lawyer representing the families of Diane's previous husbands. They had been following the case, of course. The media attention had been substantial. When it became clear that Diane had likely poisoned multiple husbands over the years, several families came forward wanting to know if there was a civil case they could bring. A lawyer named Thomas Mitchell called me one afternoon. Ms. Chen, I represent the families of Derek Hartman and Jonathan Voss, 2 of your daughter-in-law's previous husbands. We would like to hire you as a consulting expert to help us understand the toxicology of those cases and to potentially bring a civil suit against Diane for the wrongful deaths of those men. I agreed to consult. Over the next several months, I reviewed the old medical records from Derek Hartman and Jonathan Voss. I analyzed the preserved tissue samples. I provided expert testimony about the likely mechanisms of poisoning in both cases. The families ultimately settled with Diane's assets for an undisclosed sum. The money wouldn't bring their loved ones back, but it provided some measure of justice and recognition of what had been done to them. 1 year after Sophia moved in with me, I received an unexpected visitor. The woman at my door was in her early 40s, with dark hair and careful eyes. She introduced herself as Rebecca Chen, a detective with a special crimes unit. "I'm a distant cousin," she said. "I only heard recently that we were related through the family name. But more importantly, I wanted to meet you because I've been following your case." "The poisoning case. Why?" I asked. "Because I think you might be able to help with something I've been investigating." "Can I come in?" I invited her inside. We sat in my living room, and Rebecca told me about her work. She was part of a task force that investigated deaths that appeared to be natural causes but that had suspicious circumstances. "After the media attention on your daughter-in-law, I started looking back through old cases," Rebecca said. "I found patterns. Multiple cases of women, usually divorced or estranged from their families, who had married older or middle-aged men, and those men had subsequently died of cardiac events or mysterious illnesses. The women had then disappeared, often to other states, and repeated the pattern with new men." "How many cases?" I asked. "At least 6 that I've found that match the profile. Possibly more. I wanted to ask if you would be willing to consult on some of these cases, to use your expertise to determine if poisoning was involved." I looked at Rebecca. I thought about Sophia, safe in my house, alive because I had listened to her and believed her. "I'm retired," I said. "I know. But sometimes we don't retire from who we are. We just take a break." Over the next 3 years, I consulted on 6 cases. In 4 of them, I was able to establish that poisoning had occurred. New investigations were opened. One woman, a serial killer who had poisoned at least 4 men using Digitalis over a 20-year period, was eventually convicted. Sophia graduated from high school and enrolled in a pre-med program at Columbia University. She was planning to become a forensic pathologist, following in the footsteps of her grandmother, but from a different angle. "I want to be able to speak for the people who can't speak for themselves," she told me. "I want to examine bodies and find the evidence of what happened to them. I want to make sure that people like my mother can't get away with this ever again." Robert, my son, started attending therapy to understand why he had been so willing to leave his daughter in the care of someone he had begun to realize was deeply disturbed. He started seeing Sophia regularly, rebuilding their relationship slowly and carefully. And I continued my work. Not full-time, not formally, but as a consultant. I provided my expertise to cases where it could make a difference between justice and injustice, between truth and the comfortable lies that families often told themselves. 5 years after Sophia first called me from the corner of 8th and Market, I received a letter from Diane. She was incarcerated at a state prison in upstate New York, and she wanted to communicate with me. I almost threw the letter away without reading it. But something made me open it. To Margaret Chen, it began. "I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I wanted you to know that I understand what I did. Not because I regret it, I don't. I would have gotten away with poisoning Sophia just like I got away with poisoning the others. But I understand why you did what you did. You loved your granddaughter more than you valued your retirement. You were willing to use your knowledge, your expertise, your hard-won experience to protect her. In that way, we are not so different, you and I. We both knew how to manipulate systems to get what we wanted. The only difference was what we wanted. You wanted to protect. I wanted to accumulate. You were better at it than I was. I'm in prison for eternity because of you. I hope that brings you satisfaction. Diane. I burned the letter in my fireplace. It did not bring me satisfaction. Justice does not bring satisfaction. Justice brings only the knowledge that things are as they should be, that the truth has been recognized, that the guilty have been held accountable. But satisfaction? No. What satisfaction came from knowing that 4 men were dead? That their families had been destroyed? That my son had failed to recognize the danger his daughter was in? That my granddaughter had come so close to being murdered by her own mother? There was no satisfaction in any of that. What there was, instead, was peace. The peace of knowing that you had done everything in your power to prevent further harm. The peace of knowing that your granddaughter was safe. The peace of knowing that you had used the knowledge you had accumulated over a lifetime of work to make sure that one less predator was able to harm the innocent. On my 70th birthday, Sophia gave me a gift. It was a framed photograph of the 2 of us taken the year after she moved in with me. We were standing in my kitchen, both of us smiling, her arm linked through mine. She had written something on the mat underneath the photo in her careful, deliberate handwriting. To the woman who saved my life. Thank you for listening. Thank you for believing me. Thank you for being brave enough to fight. I love you, Grandma. I hung that photograph in my study, where it remains to this day. Sophia is now a 5th-year medical student at New York Presbyterian, doing a rotation in forensic pathology. She wants to specialize in cases involving poisoning and toxicology. Robert is married to a woman named Catherine, a pediatrician who is kind to Sophia and treats her like the daughter she never had. I continue to consult on cases as they come to me. Not many anymore. The task force has expanded and there are other experts, but occasionally someone reaches out, someone who needs help understanding the toxicology of a suspicious death, and I provide my expertise. Because there was something that Diane had said in her letter that was true in one regard. I do understand manipulation of systems. I do understand how to use knowledge as a tool. The difference, as she noted, was in the purpose. I use my knowledge to protect. She used hers to harm. In the end, the difference between good and evil is often that simple. It's not about the tools you have. It's about what you choose to do with them.